All right, we're live. Hey, everyone. I'm Andy DiDeRossi. I'm here with Connor and Zach. They are on our mobile development team. You guys are iOS, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And we're talking about mobile development remotely. How can we develop mobile apps for Basecamp entirely remotely without meeting at an office? And so Connor and Zach are going to show you a little bit about our process. Then if you have any questions, hit us up. We will answer pretty much anything, as long as it's not about hay or COVID-19, I guess. Cool. You guys want to introduce yourselves? Do the thing.
Sure. Connor, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my name's Conor, and I am a designer on the iOS team. And I've been at Basecamp for coming up on 6 years here. And used to be on our kind of core product team where we mostly just did web and desktop centric stuff with a little bit of mobile web work where it made sense. And then I don't know, it's been how long it's been, maybe a couple years or something like that. I switched to the iOS team, and now I get to do work with Zach and our other iOS programmer Dylan all the time, which is great.
I'm Zach Waugh. I'm the iOS developer. I've been Basecamp for 6.5 years. I'm not sure. Time since this quarantine started has slowed down, so we might have been here 20 years. But yes, been doing since I got here. I was doing iOS before I got here, and I've been doing iOS full time since I got here, working on our Basecamp apps and now working on Hey.
Yeah, so maybe we can kick things off just by kind of giving a rundown of our general approach to making an iOS app. Zach, you've made like proper full 100% iOS apps versus our hybrid one, so maybe you can give like a kind of rough sense of what makes our approach unique, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's something we talked about a lot. We've written about on signal versus noise quite a bit. I wrote a post about it, but we have like a hybrid development, which means we are doing native development, but we're also using quite a bit of web tech as well. And for us, it's for a lot of reasons, and it has a lot of benefits. One of the main reasons we do it is because we like to stay small. Basecamp has been around for 20 years. I mean, previously 37 Signals, then Basecamp. We've been around a long time. We have about 55 people now, which is like very small for a company like ours, and we like to keep it that way. We have 2 developers and 1 designer full time on iOS. We have 2 developers and a designer full time on Android. And an app like Basecamp has a lot of screens. We have something like 200-300 screens, and doing every single one of those screens natively would be, almost impossible with our size. And also it would not even be worth it. Making a one-off screen native that is, like an admin screen that's used very little there's diminishing returns. So we tend to spend our time focusing on where we can have the biggest impact. So that's some of our main screens in Basecamp. That's like all of our home screens are completely native, and then a lot of the other kind of main screens that are very heavily interactive will do fully native, and then we can rely on the entire mobile web to drive any other screens we need. And that means, we want people to be able to use the app however they want. If you want to use it in the web browser, you can. If you want to use it in the mobile web on mobile Safari, that's great. You don't have to install the apps. If you want to use the apps, that's great too. So since we're going to have a fully functional mobile web version, it makes sense to leverage that as much as possible for our native apps as well. Just got a question. Is there a push at Basecamp to let's see if I can put this on screen somehow? There we are. To more stacks like Flutter, React Native. That's a good question. We have looked at React Native, and we talked about trying to spike some of it out, but we don't use React on the front end. So it's not like a lot of people talk about using React so you can kind of share that knowledge across web and all the different platforms. We're not using React on our front ends right now. So there's no real motivation for something like React Native, or Flutter. That would be mainly so we could share kind of logic across platforms. It'd be great to share some code across Android and iOS. But so far, we haven't really found enough benefits to completely do a system like that. Our apps are completely native. We don't use any sort of third-party framework for writing them, and that gives us kind of complete control over everything. We don't have to wait for some other company to update it so we can use the latest APIs and stuff. That's kind of, we used Ruby Motion a long time ago before I started, and there's a lot of benefits to it, but there's a lot of drawbacks. Whereas if you want to, use some new iOS 13.4 API that just was released, there may be delay for these other frameworks to kind of have support for it. So yeah, we've talked about it. We talked about we use. Let me put this other question up here. What language do you write in for mobile? We do Swift for iOS and we do Kotlin for Android. And that's been the last few years. I mean, we switched to Swift pretty much as soon as released. We switched to Swift 1.0, and that's been a great decision. We do not regret that at all. Dylan's the other programmer. We love Swift, and probably can't imagine going back to Objective-C. And I know Dan and Jay on our Android team, same thing. They were in Java, and now they're doing Kotlin, and Kotlin and Swift are very similar. And it's been a huge boon to have a better language like Kotlin, or Swift for our everyday. And we keep talking about, maybe using Swift on Android or Kotlin on iOS. We each push them to use our language so we can keep it, but to share, some back-end type model business logic. But so far it's been quicker just to rewrite what we need per platform rather than try to have some other, system where we share it, and then it's always trying to keep it up to date and stuff.
Yeah.
You want to take a few other questions? I'm pulling some off of Twitter right now at #AskBasecamp. Let's go with this.
Slack heavy synchronous comms team company to use more async forms of communication. Ooh, I mean, I would say kind of probably a good place to start is to just pick some particular aspect of communication that you can move there, and maybe one that benefits especially from long form or slow time kind of communication. So we actually kind of fight this battle a little bit ourselves, even at Basecamp. So we have Campfire chat, which exists within Basecamp, and it's not uncommon for someone to drop a problem in there or a question or an idea, and people start kind of going on, and before you know it, 5 or 10 people are like piling on and all sharing their thoughts on how this could be different or that. I remember this happening actually yesterday or the day before on one thing, and a few minutes in, Jason kind of said, "Hey, can somebody just actually write this up so we can slow down and discuss it properly?" So then I took it outside and wrote up a message. Took maybe an hour later is when I actually posted something. It didn't take me the full hour to write it up, but took some time, sketched something out, explained the problem clearly, and then posted it up. And later that day, we got a solution figured out with just a couple of people actively participating rather than 10 people in the chat all going back and forth. So I think picking things like discussing like how to solve a problem usually doesn't work very great in a group chat. So when a new problem comes up the next time you're chatting, maybe say, "Hey, I volunteered to write this up in a different format, whether that's a Google Doc, an email, a Basecamp message, whatever it is that you might use," and then kind of change the discussion, move it to a different format. That's where I would start if I was in a company doing that right now.
Yeah, I think Basecamp 37 Signals before has been remote for so long. It's very much kind of in our culture to do async first. Jason wrote up a great guide to how we do internal communications. It's up on basecamp.com. But I would definitely look over that because it has some really good tips for this kind of thing. And a lot of it is for us is out of necessity. For people in time zones, if we want to post something, we don't need to expect every single person every time zone to respond immediately. Sometimes for the people in Spain, they're probably already done their day by now. So for us, a lot of it's just about kind of respecting that boundary and not having time be something that's kind of relevant. We can post things and then people can answer when they're available. We don't have to kind of do everything immediately, which also makes things calmer because it's not like a rush to get answers for things like on the spot. Everything goes asynchronous, and then when people are available, they can respond to it. And that way also things don't get lost. It's easy to kind of drop into a chat and be like, has anybody seen this bug? And then not write it up, and then it just gets lost and nobody knows the status of it. So we just kind of get in the habit of recording things so it's around, forever.
Cool. Let's take a question from YouTube, which is a popular one. Can you become an iOS mobile developer without a college degree?
I would say, yeah, for sure. These days, I have a computer science degree. I don't know if Jason and David know that. When I got hired, I don't think anyone asked me that. I never sent them a resume. I don't know. Maybe they're finding out right now. But so it's not critical. Certainly at Basecamp, it's not. Nobody asked me, nobody checked. I got my computer science degree before iOS existed. So no, certainly not required. And I think it's disputable how much it helps. So I definitely say you can become a developer without a degree, especially these days. There's so many resources. It's so easy to get started. So yeah, I would say for sure. I wouldn't let that dissuade you if you want to go to college. There's great reasons to do that, but I wouldn't say it's required.
Well, Zach, you can leave the chat now because Jason fired you in the comments there for not having a degree. Sorry. Shucks.
I know. My days were numbered.
Yeah, you're out. You're out. I got one here from, let me add it. I got to add a banner from Nick. This is a good question. How do junior engineers learn and grow within a fully remote company? How do you mentor people upward?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if it's something we don't hire that often, so it's not something we've gone through that much. But we have hired a few interns, that now work for us, and they've kind of grown as a company, and they've become some of our top people. Like George, we hired. He was in college. George was an intern, and I was working here full time, and he was answering my Rails questions. Since I'm on the iOS side, I'm not expert on Rails, so he may be an outlier since he knows everything about Rails. But we've certainly had a few people where we've brought up like that, and it's been really great. I don't know if I have any tips for how to do it, except for like everything we do is kind of support people and check in. Frequently try to communicate a lot, and make sure they're it's like when we do new hires, we have Basecamp buddies, just kind of make sure they're feeling supported and they have people to talk to.
Cool. Here we go. How do we use Basecamp for any QA? Do we have any templates?
Well, we're pretty fortunate. We've got Michael Berger, who is our one-man QA show these days, and when we want something QA'd, we basically just write up a short message or to-do that's like, "Hey, Michael, would you mind taking a look at this feature?" And we usually call out like a few bullet points of things that have changed, things that like screens that might be affected, or a particular flow that he should focus on. If there's something in particular, like maybe we've recently updated our composers where you would type out a comment or something like that. We'll kind of say, hey, we updated the composers for typing out a comment, but this might also affect, where you write a brand new message or where you post a check-in answer, things like that. So there's kind of a few places that might be interconnected. So we'll kind of call those out. And then Michael will kind of start on it. And he actually has a team of folks at a company. What's a company called again?
A Spiritech?
A Spiritech, that's right. She's got a team of people at a Spiritech that actually hop on and do the work with him remotely, essentially. And they'll go through a few different flows, document things, and then Michael kind of sorts through their to-dos and posts them back to us with what issues will come up. And they just show up in our project alongside the rest of our work, where we can kind of work through them like we would any other task related to a project.
They're super cool too. I think they're like a nonprofit or a company dedicated to employing neuroatypical folks. It's a really cool thing. We met them at one of our company meetups, I remember.
Yeah, I'm just seeing if I have an example that I can pull up real quick with any QA stuff. Oh, here's one.
Cool.
I'll share my screen real quick, and you can see an idea of this.
Yeah, while Connor's pulling that up, we use Basecamp for everything. We don't use any external bug trackers. We don't use GitHub issues or anything. So everything that we track for work, as far as to-dos or bugs, they all end up into Basecamp.
Yeah, so here's like a project we had it was around composing. That's why it was on my mind, I guess. And we were kind of tweaking how you can write emails or add notes to things. And so we had our regular to-do list for the project, how you would continue a draft, presenting the composer modally, dealing with replies, all these various aspects. And then at the top, you'll see we have kind of one QA list where stuff got dropped in. So as things happen, we just kind of add them, and then we work through them, check them off as we go, assign them to whoever it is that needs to work on it. And it's as simple as that. Nothing too glamorous. We just make a list called QA and chug through it.
Yeah, then we generally, once everything's on a to-do, there's a comment thread attached, so we can generally we'll post back there and we'll write a comment, say, hey, we fixed this, or I can't reproduce this. Can you give me some more details? And Michael or whoever filed the bug will, maybe attach a video or some images showing how to reproduce, so we can be sure we get it right, and then we'll tend to comment back once we fix it or explaining what the bug was. So next time we search for that bug, we'll know when it got fixed, and we'll also kind of have all the details behind it, what happened and how it got resolved.
Cool. Let's go with can we show bug tracking? Is there something good we could show with that?
What Connor just showed was pretty much our bug tracking. We don't really do that much kind of backlogs for bugs, but we do generally just, let me see if I can pull something up here. We kind of have a pattern for Basecamp, which is to have these triage type lists where we, often, can you see that?
There you go.
So this will be like, this is our iOS project. This is our iOS team project, and we'll have this triage list. And this is where people will generally just kind of, from throughout the team, maybe they're from support, or maybe there's somebody internally just using the app, they'll say, hey, I saw this bug, and then they'll just file it here. So this triage is kind of like, hey, you can dump anything you want here. You don't have to worry about how to sort it for our team, or if it's a duplicate, we'll figure that out. So that's just kind of people post this. You can see these little things mean there's a note. So that's usually some screenshots or, here's just one that came up the other day, screenshot about these little rendering bug with these little pie charts. So that's something we'll just kind of pop in there. And then when we get to it, we'll move it from triage to whatever project we're working on. So when we're doing the next app update, we can go through those, pick those bugs out and say, okay, we're going to fix these, and then for a good amount of them, we'll just kind of, sometimes we're not going to fix these, or they're not really main issues, or we can't reproduce them, and we'll just, end up archiving them.
Cool. Super cool. How do we brainstorm ideas for features or software increments? Mark uses Scrum. Refining via video chat doesn't feel right or productive. I'm sure a lot of people are like forced into this video chat process right now after doing it in person for so long.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm trying to see if I can maybe pull up an example here. In general, though, the way we do it is when we notice something, we'll kind of write something up and share with the team. Let me find. Sorry, I'm just looking for a message here. Sorry, I'm having a hard time finding any good Basecamp ones, but let me just show some of a Hey one without giving away too much here.
The secrets.
We don't want to get censored.
Nope.
I don't want to get fired like Zach.
I mean, Zach can't get fired twice, so.
Yeah, let me just show everything. I'm already done.
So here's a kind of example. We're dealing with how do we deal with with Hey as an email app, and how do we make things offline for people? So we had kind of talked about this as a team and some of the challenges that we were facing with it. And so I decided to kind of write something up to share with folks in the company. So this is kind of a rough format that we use sometimes, but certainly not all the time. So you can kind of see here, kind of outline problem areas with this big red X, and then things that we think we could do to deal with it. So Zach's actually in the middle of working on some of this right now. And the way it started was essentially we feel the pain of some issue. Okay, we know we want things to be available offline, but how do we make sure that people will know what's offline? So in this case, we say, hey, well, people probably want to see the new emails that are in their inbox. So what we can do is go and eagerly fetch them and save them to the person's device in advance, things like that. So this kind of goes down and it lists out a whole bunch of different kind of issues. And then eventually there's some screenshots that show what we might do, which I'll save for another time. And that's kind of a general rough idea of how we get things going. And then you can see here with this 12 that's on the side here, that means there's 12 comments on this. So once I posted this, people will chime in with their own thoughts and opinions on what's viable or not viable about this pitch, what we might want to change or do differently, things that we should maybe include that we didn't consider, or things that we should exclude because they might be too difficult. So that's kind of how things get started, and then how we discuss them is just in those comments, and then either we'll choose to work on it at some point or we will choose not to. So you'll see this was posted on March 4th, but we're just working on it now. So just because something gets talked about doesn't mean we're necessarily going to work on it right away or anything like that.
Right. I mean, this is all kind of part of the shape up type process of, we usually, whoever think of ideas, Conor as a designer does a lot of the kind of the bulk of the feature development for iOS, but Dylan and I also, if we think of something, we say we should do this, and then we're kind of, thinking about it, then we'll write up a pitch, post it for the rest of the team or maybe the rest of the company, depending on the pitch. And then we'll kind of chat, refine it, figure out if this, is this going to be 2 days? Is this going to be 2 weeks? And then that's when we kind of part of the shape up process of like, okay, what's our appetite for this? Are we going to do it next cycle? Are we going to do it now or never? Sometimes we pitch things and we just don't do them because they just don't fit right now with what else is important. Or sometimes we're like, all right, this makes sense for next cycle. So we'll refine the pitch and figure out what it needs, and we'll decide, yeah, let's do it next cycle.
Cool. Let's take some more from chat. I'm gonna put this one up there like I pretend that I understand any of it. What architectural pattern do you use at Basecamp, and did you start using Swift UI in production?
Yeah, I mean, we use MVC, which is kind of the standard model view controller type pattern for Cocoa apps, for iOS, which, most apps these days like Rails is MVC. We don't use kind of any other specific pattern besides that for our iOS apps. There's a whole bunch of different ones out there, and they kind of, come and go trends, but generally haven't found any of them to be that useful. We do use a little bit of the view model pattern, which helps for especially some complex screens of making these view models and using that for kind of taking models, kind of like a presenter to display on the screen. But yeah, we don't have anything else specific for that. Swift UI though, we actually just started playing with. We're not using it in production on the Basecamp app yet, but we are using it a little bit in Hey. I can't show you for what, but sorry, this is not fun. We're just teasing. You'll see in a few months. But no, we're using it for a little bit. We're not going to do so. Swift UI, for anybody who doesn't know, it's just a new way to build interfaces for Cocoa, for iOS and for Mac apps, for tvOS. So it's a completely different way to build interfaces. We play with it. We really like it from what we've done. But Apple tends to be a little bit kind of buggy out of the gate with some of these new things, or at least let's say limited. You'll hit a dead end pretty quickly. Realize there's something there's no way to do. So we're going to be a little bit more conservative for something like the main bulk of the UI in the app. But I built kind of like a little debug screen with it. And Dylan's working on a feature right now that could benefit from it. So we're using it here and there, and we're going to test it out, see how we like it, how it performs, if there's any problems, and then if it's all good, we'll probably keep doing more and more. But we're not going to write the whole app in it yet. The whole app is still UI kit, and then just some little bits of Swift UI for now. But so far, we really, really like it, and it's pretty awesome, and we're hoping to use it more because it's much faster for writing UI. But we're just being a little bit cautious.
Yeah, it's hopefully also more comprehensible for me. So I'm not a proper programmer. I do some light programming as a designer, and I'm pretty comfortable with the whole Rails side of things and all the web dev stuff. But once I hop into iOS land, things feel quite strange. So getting bit by bit, getting better at it. And like when they have view models, like Zach was talking about, it makes it a little bit easier for me to manipulate some of the things without having to understand all the pieces. But I think we're hopeful that as we get some more Swift UI stuff, I'll be able to get my hands dirty a little bit more with that too, which is always fun.
Cool. Here's a generic one. How different is developing for iOS from developing for Android? We need Jamie in here is what we need. Can have a battle.
No, we don't need that. No. Yeah, you should do one of these with Android for sure. I haven't done Android development, but we work closely with the Android team, and from what I've seen of the code, like without even knowing most Android stuff, I can follow along with how it's working. There's some different patterns with like the intents versus the fragments versus the view controllers and stuff, but it's pretty similar, especially with Kotlin and Swift are really similar. If you can read Kotlin, you can read Swift and vice versa. So I would say they're more similar than different at this point, besides just, some of the actual OS frameworks,
Besides just that iOS is better. Mostly.
Right, obviously.
Big differentiator.
That's a given. No, yeah, they're pretty similar though.
I think this Turbolinks question is a good one.
Yeah, you might also want to break down what Turbolinks is. That's one thing I've actually heard of before.
Yeah, so Turbolinks is this cool web technology that is baked into Rails, and it allows for really fast transitions between pages, essentially. So what it does is instead of having to reload all of the assets for your web application on every single page visit, all your JavaScript styles, et cetera, we keep all that kind of there, and we just swap out the content of the HTML body, which means a lot faster page changes. And what's awesome is we have adapters for iOS and Android apps that allow us to work with that on iOS too, so we get faster page loads when we're using web views on iOS. And Zach, I don't know how you should probably walk through some of what that adapter is all about or how we use it. But
right, yeah. So Turbolinks is a way to basically kind of get the single page application feel with doing server side rendered HTML. So like Connor said, all the page changes are fast because we don't have to reprocess, re-download, reparse, reevaluate all the JavaScript and CSS. And the Turbolinks for the apps part is just about using that same kind of thing, but allowing us to use one web view on multiple screens. So what that means is like we have a web view of the page, and then you navigate to a new page. We move the same web view to the next page instead of having to load a complete, separate web view for every screen. So that makes it a lot faster and also reduces memory usage and stuff like that. I could probably, let me see if I could show this.
While Zach's pulling that up, Turbolinks is really, it's a big secret weapon for us in terms of unlocking a lot of abilities to reuse stuff from the web and still have it be performant on iOS.
Right, so here is, this is a screen from our Basecamp 3 iOS app. I just have it pulled up in the simulator so I can share my screen, but this is actually hitting our production site logged in for my account. All this up here, this is a standard iOS native navigation controller. This is navigation bar, navigation items. This is UI tab bar controller. So these are all native components. This whole navigation is native. Everything in here, though, all this content is a web view. So this is a web view, and we're rendering that in our native screens using Turbolinks. And one thing that gives us, and we have some other kind of technologies that we're building on top of Turbolinks to do this, and we're going to release some of that, hopefully in the next few months after we get Hey out the door. But it allows us to, what we call bridge some of these web elements to native elements. So this this options menu is all pulling things out of the DOM of this web view. This is a native menu that we're displaying, and it's all getting its content directly from this page. Same with these little menus. When you click that, we're actually loading all that so we can give you the native native menu, which has a lot of advantages. It feels more at home on the platform. It's kind of what the user will expect. So we kind of treat everything with Turbolinks and our native apps as a progressive enhancement, where the web view, the mobile web works great, but then we can also kind of level it up, and we can display this native menu for iOS. We can display a native menu for Android, but we're sharing this whole screen, and we can share the JavaScript code and the rendering code across desktop, mobile web, Android, and iOS. So that's kind of what Turbolinks gives us.
Cool, super cool. This is another one. There you go. I'm gonna let you read it.
Now, how do you manage all the new OS releases? iOS 14, Android 11. From time to time, be pretty big changes in terms of API. Can ask for a lot of refactoring. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, this is iOS. We're pretty lucky here because we're going to ship Hey, and it's only going to support iOS 13. We generally support the current version of iOS and the previous version. Android's a little bit tougher position. I know they've had to, I don't even know what they support, but sometimes it's 3, 4, 5, 6 releases back, just because the usage is pretty distributed across those versions. So as far as new APIs and stuff, usually that stuff is, unless it's something old we're using is deprecated, we can just keep using what we've been using, and there's enough time to update to the new stuff as we see fit. We generally don't try to chase it and update to something like Swift UI, right out of the gate, or Combine. We kind of let it sit for a while, and then we'll pick out little pieces. We're using some bits of Combine right now in Hey, but we're not, we just kind of adopt it slowly and see how it works. And then we don't feel any big pressure to change immediately unless it's a deprecation. But Apple's pretty good about deprecating things over, 3 to 4 OS releases. Sometimes the things like UI WebView is deprecated, and we had to remove that from one of our apps, and that could be a big change. But as long as you know what's coming, like they warned us like 2 or 3 years ago that was going to happen, it's usually not too big of a deal to keep up.
Yeah, that's it. After like WWDC and stuff, there's usually a couple weeks of kind of disruption, but it's probably voluntary. Like we want to see we want to try out some of the new stuff or get into it. So there's, it tends to be like a little bit of a change in our regular work for a week or two after a bunch of stuff is announced or after the first beta comes out, things like that.
Yeah, I should mention this except for the stuff that gets broken unintentionally, which has happened. We'll just build it with the new, when the new Xcode comes out or new OS version, we'll build it and stuff that was working is breaking and it's not documented. It just starts breaking. We'll have to fix, which can be, frustrating depending on how big it is. But usually that hasn't been a problem the last few releases. Since iOS 11 or so, this seems like it's been pretty stable. Some of the stuff is a little bit more disruptive, like safe areas. Once we get like the iPhone X with the notch, and then that changes a lot of things. So that's stuff we just have to adapt to. We don't really have much of a choice. And hopefully if you're doing things kind of the Apple way, it's not too disruptive. And that's one case where you see somebody else mentioned, about using React Native or Flutter. That's one case where going with the standard UI kit helps a lot, because each year of these changes come, it's a lot easier to adopt than if we had to wait for some other framework to also adopt it and then make those changes. So we haven't had too many bad experiences with that.
Cool. Here's one. I feel like I know the answer to this, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm not religious about that kind of thing. Some people are, but I think, use whatever is right for your company and for your situation. For us, like I mentioned earlier, we're not using React elsewhere, so there's really not a big push. I like React from what I play with it, but we just hasn't been the right decision for us to adopt React Native. And I mentioned this a little bit in one of the blog posts I wrote about Basecamp 3's architecture, but we like to have as much control as possible. And using any sort of framework, you're going to give up some level of control. You're going to gain some stuff too. You're going to gain some, maybe it's faster, to build certain things, and you get some things free, you get some sharing, but then you're also going to give up some things like control, or if there's a performance issue, you might have something just impossible to fix. So that's where we prefer to be in control and just have a standard Xcode project and standards, Swift classes and UI kit components as much as possible. Then we can control all of that, and we can kind of weigh the benefits, a little bit easier since we're not a React team. So if we were using React, maybe we would have a different opinion there. But so far, we've been pretty happy just sticking with what the systems provide out of the box.
Cool. That is all of our questions for right now. Do you guys have anything you want to add?
Here's one that maybe Conor might add, but is it necessary to specialize in mobile app development? I don't know if you can pull that one up, Andy. 319. How different is it from web development?
Oh yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, I missed that one. It is there.
Yeah. So I'm not a programmer. I'm not like a real programmer in either, but I can tell you that having worked primarily on the website for a long time and then moved to the mobile app side in the last couple of years, things are definitely different. For me, the design skills and things like that seem to transfer over relatively well. And I think a lot of the knowledge that I learned about programming from Ruby and JavaScript definitely give me familiarity. Like I can generally read through a feature or commits that Zach and Dylan are putting together and understand kind of the general idea of what's going on, and I can hop into something that exists and tinker with it. But I also pretty quickly hit dead ends just because I don't understand the APIs, or I don't understand like the overall architecture of how an iOS app is assembled. Like where something in Rails might be, I add a controller here and a view there. In iOS, it seems like there's kind of like 5 or 6 things I have to to add to make that happen, and I'm just not as familiar with some of the details of that. So I think most skills, if you start in one world or the other, a lot of the skills will transfer over just fine. But there's going to be domain specific stuff that is unique to iOS or unique to Android or unique to Rails or unique to Laravel or whatever tool or technology you happen to be using. But I'd say a good 50, 60, 70% of skills are going to transfer over as you go between web development and mobile app development, etc.
Yeah, I think it's tough to say. We're kind of maybe in a unique spot here since we do, with the hybrid, we spend a lot of our time on both. As developers, we probably spend, I don't know, 80% of our time, 90% in Swift, but then that other 10 to 20% is spent in Ruby, Rails, and JavaScript. And Conor spends a lot of his time on CSS and stuff, since we're displaying these web views and making them look right in the apps. So we're kind of touching all those pieces quite a bit. And there's different conventions, which makes it a little bit hard. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's pretty similar. I don't think if you do one, you'd have any trouble switching, or if you do Android, have trouble switching to iOS, or going from mobile to web. I think today everything's pretty similar.
Yep.
Cool. Rock and roll. Great. That's all the ones from Twitter for today. That was awesome, guys. Do you have anything you want to add before we log off?
Nothing particular, but happy to answer other questions if people have them. Just post to us on Twitter, and we'll be happy to respond how we can.
Cool. And this recording will be available too. If you're watching this, you want to go back, it'll be on Twitter. It'll be on YouTube. Might be on our Twitch. I don't know if that saves videos, but you can definitely get at Conor and Zach on the Twitter. So thanks, fellas. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, sure. We'll do one in a few months when we can actually look at Hey and we'll talk about some of the things we did there. That'd be really cool to actually do like a retrospective and show, what got built, but we got to launch it first, I guess. All right, fellas, have a good day.
Awesome.
See ya.
Yeah.